Commander Vex-Prime adjusted his optical sensors for the third time in 10 rotations, still unable to process what the tactical screens were displaying. The bridge of the Dreadnought Sovereign's wrath hummed with nervous energy as his crew scrambled to verify readings that should have been impossible. Tell me again, Navigation Officer Krill, how exactly a single planet managed to obliterate 3 of our advanced scout fleets. Vex-Prime's voice carried the kind of weary sarcasm that only came from commanding military operations for 2 centuries. Krill's tentacles twitched nervously as he consulted his instruments. Sir, our preliminary reconnaissance indicated that the third planet in this system, which they call Earth, possessed only rudimentary spacefaring capabilities. Chemical propulsion, basic satellites. Their most advanced vessels could barely reach their own moon. And yet, Vex-Prime gestured at the debris field slowly rotating outside their reinforced hull. Here we are, staring at the remains of 47 warships, each one capable of glassing an entire continent. The irony was not lost on him. The Galactic Dominion had been expanding across the spiral arm for over 3,000 years, encountering hundreds of species, most of whom surrendered after witnessing a single demonstration of their military superiority. The few who resisted were quickly reduced to subservient colonies after brief, one-sided conflicts. But Earth had done something no other species had managed in millennia. They had made the Dominion look foolish. Sir, Communications Officer Zenth interrupted, his voice trembling with what Vex-Prime recognized as barely controlled panic. We are receiving another transmission from the planet's surface. Put it through the main speakers. Vex-Prime settled back into his command throne, preparing himself for whatever fresh humiliation these bizarre creatures had devised. The voice that filled the bridge was distinctly human, speaking in their common tongue, with an accent Vex-Prime had learned to associate with their North American continent. But more disturbing than the words was the tone. Casual, almost bored, as if the speaker were discussing weather patterns rather than interstellar warfare. Good morning, Commander Vex-Prime. I trust you have had adequate time to examine the debris field we left for your consideration. My name is Director Marcus Webb, representing the United Earth Defense Council. Before we proceed with this conversation, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for the destruction of your scout fleets. Vex-Prime's mandibles clicked together involuntarily. An apology? After obliterating nearly 50 warships? Webb continued. We realize that our defensive response may have seemed disproportionate to your initial reconnaissance efforts. However, I am sure you understand that when unidentified vessels begin conducting detailed scans of our planet and military installations, we tend to assume hostile intent. Defensive response. Vex-Prime muttered to himself. They call vaporizing 3 entire fleets a defensive response. Furthermore, Webb's voice continued with that maddeningly calm tone. We wanted to provide you with an opportunity to reconsider your current course of action before the situation escalates beyond anyone's ability to control it peacefully. The transmission paused, and Vex-Prime could hear what sounded like paper rustling in the background. Were these creatures actually reading from notes during a military confrontation? Now then, Webb resumed. According to our intelligence analysis, your species operates under the assumption that technological superiority equals military dominance. This is understandable, given your historical success rate. However, we feel obligated to point out that your intelligence analysis regarding human capabilities appears to have been somewhat inadequate. Officer Krill leaned toward his commander's position. Sir, shall I ready our primary weapons array? We still have enough firepower to reduce their entire planet to molten slag. Vex-Prime held up one clawed appendage for silence. Something about this human's tone was setting off every instinct he had developed during his military career. Prey species did not speak with such confidence when facing overwhelming firepower. Webb's voice filled the bridge again. We have taken the liberty of compiling a brief demonstration of human defensive capabilities for your review. I believe you will find it educational. The main tactical display suddenly flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a live feed from somewhere in Earth's orbital space. Vex-Prime watched as a sleek, silver vessel materialized seemingly from nowhere, its design unlike anything in the Dominion's extensive database of known spacecraft. What you're observing, Webb explained with the patience of a teacher addressing particularly slow students, is one of our standard patrol vessels. Nothing fancy, mind you, just basic defensive armament suitable for discouraging unwanted visitors. The human vessel was roughly 1/10 the size of Vex-Prime's dreadnought, but as he watched, weapons ports began opening along its hull like predatory flowers blooming in reverse. Now, Commander, I want you to observe something interesting about human military philosophy. We do not believe in proportional response. We believe in conclusive response. The patrol vessel fired a single, brilliant beam of energy that struck an asteroid roughly the size of a small moon. The rock simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris field, no gradual disintegration. One moment it was there. The next moment there was empty space where several billion tons of matter had been. Vex-Prime felt his circulatory fluid temperature drop several degrees. That particular weapon system, Webb continued conversationally, operates by temporarily reversing localized entropy. Target does not explode, Commander. It simply stops having ever existed in the first place. We find it quite effective for eliminating persistent problems. The human vessel vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the conspicuous absence of a celestial body. But perhaps you are thinking that a single patrol vessel, regardless of its capabilities, poses little threat to a dreadnought of your size and power. This is reasonable thinking, Commander. Very logical. Webb paused again, and Vex-Prime could swear he heard the sound of liquid being poured into a container. Was this insane creature having refreshments during a military standoff? The difficulty with that logic, however, is that it assumes you are facing a single patrol vessel. Computer, please display current defensive posture. The tactical screens erupted with contacts. Hundreds of them. Thousands. They surrounded the Dominion fleet in a perfect sphere, each contact representing a vessel identical to the one they had just observed, demonstrating its reality-erasing capabilities. As you can see, Webb's voice carried just a hint of amusement now. We have taken the precaution of deploying what we consider adequate defensive coverage for this conversation. Each of those vessels carries enough firepower to reduce your dreadnought to its component atoms. Well, technically speaking, to reduce it to its component possibility of having been atoms, but the practical effect is the same. Officer Zenth was frantically adjusting his sensor array, trying to understand how thousands of vessels could have appeared without triggering any of their early warning systems. Sir, he whispered urgently, I am detecting massive energy signatures from all of those contacts, but our sensors insist they are not actually there. According to our instruments, we are surrounded by empty space. That would be our cloaking technology, Webb explained, apparently having overheard the exchange. Human stealth systems operate on principles your science has not yet encountered. We do not merely bend light around our vessels, Commander. We bend probability around them. As far as reality is concerned, they exist in a state of quantum maybe-ness until we choose to interact with your physical space. Vex-Prime was beginning to understand why the Dominion's expansion had ground to a halt at the edge of this particular solar system. These humans were not simply technologically advanced. They were technologically incomprehensible. Now then, Webb continued, his tone shifting slightly towards something that might have been sympathy. I want to assure you that we harbor no particular hostility toward your species or your government. Frankly, your expansion efforts throughout this galactic region have been relatively benign compared to some of the alternatives we have observed. You conquer planets, yes, but you do not tend to engage in wholesale genocide or cultural obliteration. This is appreciated. The pause that followed was longer this time, and when Webb spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made every creature on the bridge instinctively straighten their posture. However, Earth is not available for conquest, Commander Vex-Prime. Not now, not ever, not under any conceivable circumstances. This is not a negotiating position. This is not a diplomatic stance. This is simply reality. Webb's voice, took on what Vex-Prime could only describe as a lecturing tone. "You see, Commander, your species operates under the assumption that military conflict is about matching force against force until one side achieves decisive superiority. This is a perfectly reasonable approach when dealing with most spacefaring civilizations." Another pause. Another sound of liquid being poured. "Humans, however, do not engage in military conflict, Commander. We engage in problem solving, and we have become quite proficient at solving problems permanently." The tactical display shifted again, this time showing what appeared to be a historical recording. Vex-Prime watched as human vessels, clearly primitive compared to what they had just witnessed, engaged in combat with each other above their home planet. "What you are observing," Webb explained, "is footage for what we call our Third Global War, roughly 200 years ago by your calendar. Note the level of destruction these primitive vessels were capable of inflicting upon each other. The recording showed entire continents being scarred by weapons that seemed to tear reality itself. Cities vanished in bursts of light that made stellar flares look like candle flames. That conflict lasted approximately 6 months," Webb continued, "and resulted in the deaths of roughly 3 billion human beings. It ended not because one side achieved victory, but because both sides simultaneously realized they were on the verge of accidentally sterilizing their own planet." The recording faded, replaced by what appeared to be contemporary images of Earth. Pristine cities, flourishing ecosystems, thriving populations. The interesting thing about humans, Commander, is that we learn from our mistakes. That war taught us several valuable lessons. First, that our capacity for destruction far exceeds our capacity for wisdom. Second, that survival requires us to channel that destructive capability toward external threats rather than internal conflicts. And third, Webb paused, and when he continued, his voice carried an undertone that made Vex-Prime's sensory organs recoil involuntarily. Third, that there is no problem which cannot be solved through the application of sufficient force, provided that force is applied with adequate creativity and complete ruthlessness. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Sovereign's wrath in absolute silence. The Vex-Prime stared at the tactical display, where thousands of impossible human vessels continued their patient orbit around his fleet, each one apparently capable of erasing his command from existence without leaving behind evidence that it had ever been built. "Sir," Officer Krill ventured quietly, "what are your orders?" Vex-Prime considered his options. He could order an attack, knowing that it would likely result in the complete annihilation of every Dominion vessel in this system. He could attempt to negotiate, though the humans had made it clear that negotiation was not actually an option. Or he could do something that no Dominion commander had done in over 3 millennia, that he could retreat. But as he contemplated the tactical implications of each choice, another transmission began crackling through the communications array. This time, the voice was different, younger, female, and carrying an undertone of what Vex-Prime was beginning to recognize as characteristically human amusement. "Commander Vex-Prime, this is Admiral Rachel Torres, commanding the Earth Defense Fleet. Director Webb asked me to clarify a few points about our previous conversation, since we detected some confusion in your bio readings." Torres spoke with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to command, but beneath that efficiency was something that made Vex-Prime's combat instincts scream warnings. "First, I want to address any misconceptions you might have about the scale of our defensive capabilities. The vessels currently surrounding your fleet represent approximately 0.001% of our total military assets. We are showing you our patrol boats, Commander. Our actual warships are somewhat more comprehensive in their capabilities. 0.001%. Vex-Prime felt his respiratory system begin operating in emergency mode. "Second, I want to clarify our position regarding your presence in this system. We are not asking you to leave, Commander. We are not demanding that you abandon your expansion efforts. We are not negotiating terms for your withdrawal." Torres paused, and Vex-Prime could hear what sounded like tactical displays being manipulated in the background. "We are informing you that you have exactly 72 hours to remove every Dominion vessel from this solar system. Any ship remaining after that deadline will be classified as a hostile occupation force and dealt with accordingly. The transmission continued, but Torres' tone shifted towards something that might have been conversational if it were not carrying implications that froze Vex-Prime's hemolymph in his circulatory system. Now, I realize this might seem unreasonable from your perspective. After all, your species has spent thousands of years expanding across this galactic region without encountering meaningful resistance. You have developed certain expectations about how these encounters typically proceed. Another pause. The sound of what might have been atmospheric processing systems cycling in the background. The difficulty, Commander, is that humans do not typically proceed in any particular manner. We tend to improvise. The 72-hour deadline had seemed generous when Admiral Torres first announced it. Now, with barely 18 hours remaining, Commander Vex-Prime found himself questioning every decision that had brought him to this moment. His communication officers had been working continuously, transmitting urgent reports back to Dominion High Command, but the responses they received were becoming increasingly unhelpful. Sir, Officer Zenth announced with barely concealed frustration, High Command's latest directive orders us to assess the situation and proceed with standard occupation protocols. They refuse to acknowledge that standard protocols do not apply to species capable of erasing matter from existence. Vex-Prime's mandibles clicked together in what his crew recognized as deep contemplation mixed with growing irritation. The Dominion had built its reputation on overwhelming force and technological superiority, but neither advantage seemed relevant when facing an enemy that treated physics like a set of optional guidelines. Have our science teams completed their analysis of the human weapon demonstrations? He asked, already suspecting the answer would provide little comfort. Chief Science Officer Kex-9 consulted her data tablets with a methodical precision that had made her invaluable during previous campaigns. Sir, our analysis indicates that the entropy reversal weapon violates at least 14 fundamental principles of known physics. According to our models, such a device should be impossible to construct, impossible to power, and impossible to control without destroying the vessel firing it. She paused, her optical sensors focusing on readings that clearly troubled her scientific sensibilities. Furthermore, sir, the quantum probability manipulation they demonstrated suggests mastery of theoretical concepts that our most advanced research facilities consider purely hypothetical. We are not merely outgunned, Commander. We are facing technology that should not exist. The irony was becoming painful. The Galactic Dominion prided itself on scientific advancement, yet these humans were casually demonstrating capabilities that their greatest minds dismissed as impossible. It was like discovering that primitive Stone Age hunters had secretly developed faster than light travel. Sir, Communications Officer Zenth interrupted. We are receiving another transmission from the planet's surface, this time from a different human facility. Put it through, Vex-Prime ordered, settling into his command throne with the resignation of someone expecting fresh humiliation. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to yet another human, this one speaking with the kind of clinical detachment that Vex-Prime associated with research scientists rather than military commanders. Commander Vex-Prime, this is Dr. Benjamin Cross, Director of Strategic Assessment for the Earth Defense Council. I understand that you may be experiencing some difficulty processing the tactical situation, so I've been asked to provide additional context that might assist your decision-making process. Dr. Cross spoke with the patient tone of an educator addressing students who were struggling with basic concepts. Our intelligence analysis indicates that your species has encountered approximately 437 different civilizations during your expansion across this galactic region. In every case, your superior technology allowed you to achieve decisive victory within days or weeks of initial contact. Vex-Prime could hear the sound of data being accessed in the background, along with what might have been atmospheric recycling systems. The difficulty, Commander, is that your intelligence regarding human capabilities appears to have been based on observation of our civilian infrastructure rather than our military assets. This is understandable, since we make considerable effort to keep our defensive systems concealed from casual observation. Dr. Cross paused, and when he continued, his voice carried undertones that made every member of the bridge crew instinctively check their personal defense shields. What you observed during our demonstration represents technology that we developed approximately 50 years ago. It has since been superseded by systems that are significantly more comprehensive in their capabilities. The main tactical display flickered to life again, this time showing what appeared to be a detailed schematic of some kind of massive construction project. Vex-Prime studied the display, trying to understand what he was seeing, before realizing with growing horror that the scale indicators were not displaying the construction in meters or kilometers. They were displaying it in astronomical units. What you are observing, Dr. Cross explained with the same clinical detachment, is our primary defensive installation. We call it the Solar Perimeter Defense Grid. Construction was completed approximately 20 years ago, though we have continued making improvements to its operational capabilities. The schematic rotated slowly, revealing a structure that encompassed the entire solar system like a three-dimensional web of interconnected platforms, each one apparently larger than most inhabited planets. The grid operates on principles that your science would classify as multidimensional engineering, Dr. Cross continued. Each platform exists simultaneously in several parallel universes, allowing us to channel defensive capabilities from multiple reality streams into this dimensional framework. Officer Krill was frantically adjusting his sensor arrays, trying to detect any trace of the massive construction project the humans were describing. Sir, our instruments show no evidence of any artificial structures beyond their basic orbital installations. If this grid exists, it is completely invisible to our detection systems. That would be correct, Dr. Cross acknowledged, apparently monitoring their communications. The grid exists in what we term tactical probability space. It is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere until we require its services. At that point, it becomes extremely present. Dr. Cross paused again, and this time Vex-Prime could hear what sounded like multiple voices engaged in technical discussions. Now then, Commander, I want to address what I suspect is your primary concern at this moment. You are wondering whether humanity represents a threat to the galactic dominion beyond our immediate solar system. This is reasonable thinking. The schematic disappeared, replaced by what appeared to be a star chart showing the local galactic region. Vex-Prime recognized the territories controlled by the Dominion, marked in their traditional blue coloring, but scattered throughout the display were small red markers he had never seen before. Those red indicators, Dr. Cross explained, represent human monitoring stations. We have been observing Dominion expansion efforts for approximately 200 years, ever since our deep space sensors detected your species' emergence into this galactic region. 200 years? The Dominion had only become aware of humanity's existence 6 months ago, when their long-range surveys had finally reached this solar system. We have found your expansion methods to be relatively benign compared to several other spacefaring civilizations we have encountered. You conquer planets and subjugate populations. Yes, but you do not typically engage in species extinction or cultural obliteration. This has been noted in our assessment of your civilization. Dr. Cross's tone shifted slightly, becoming more formal and carrying implications that made Vex-Prime's respiratory system operate in emergency mode. However, Commander, humanity has certain boundaries regarding acceptable behavior in our local galactic neighborhood. These boundaries are non-negotiable and will be enforced regardless of cost or consequence. The star chart zoomed in, focusing on a spherical region of space centered on Earth's solar system. The sphere encompassed roughly 50 star systems, including several that Vex-Prime knew contained valuable Dominion colonies. This region, Dr. Cross announced, is under human protection. Any attempt to establish military installations, conduct resource extraction, or impose governmental control within this sphere will result in immediate defensive action. Immediate defensive action. The phrase carried implications that froze Vex-Prime's circulatory fluid. Furthermore, Dr. Cross continued, We have identified several Dominion activities in nearby systems that violate our standards for acceptable interspecies conduct. These activities will cease within 90 standard days, or we will be forced to address them directly. The transmission paused, and Vex-Prime could hear what sounded like atmosphere processing systems cycling in the background, along with the low hum of what might have been massive energy generation equipment. I realize this may seem unreasonable from your perspective, Commander. Your species has operated under the assumption that technological superiority equals the right to impose your will upon less advanced civilizations. This assumption has served you well for thousands of years. Dr. Cross's voice took on what Vex-Prime could only describe as a lecturing tone, as if he were explaining basic principles to particularly slow students. The difficulty with that assumption, however, is that it depends upon maintaining technological superiority. When that superiority is lost, the entire foundation of your expansion strategy becomes problematic. The star chart disappeared, replaced by what appear to be real-time tactical displays showing Dominion military installations throughout the local galactic region. Vex-Prime watched with growing alarm as the displays highlighted weapon emplacements, fleet positions, and strategic resources with accuracy that should have been impossible for any external observer to achieve. We have been monitoring your military capabilities for 2 centuries, Commander. We know the location of every Dominion vessel, the specifications of every weapon system, and the strategic importance of every installation within 50 light-years of Earth. Dr. Cross paused, and when he continued, his voice carried undertones that made every creature on the bridge instinctively check their personal defense systems. More importantly, we have developed countermeasures for every threat your technology represents. Your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. Your ships cannot escape our tracking systems. Your communications cannot avoid our interception capabilities. The tactical displays shifted, showing what appeared to be simulation data of hypothetical conflicts between human and Dominion forces. In every scenario, Dominion fleets were eliminated so quickly that the engagement timers barely registered measurable duration. This is not intended as a threat, Commander, Dr. Cross explained with the patient tone of someone stating obvious facts. This is simply tactical reality. Humanity possesses the capability to eliminate every Dominion presence in this galactic region within approximately 72 hours if we determine such action to be necessary. 72 hours. The same deadline they had been given to evacuate this solar system. However, Dr. Cross continued, we prefer diplomatic solutions to military ones. Warfare is expensive, time-consuming, and tends to create unnecessary complications for civilian populations. The transmission paused again, and this time Vex-Prime could hear what sounded like multiple conversations occurring simultaneously in the background. Therefore, Commander, we are prepared to offer the Galactic Dominion a comprehensive peace agreement. We will provide you with technological assistance that will allow your civilization to advance beyond its current expansionist phase. In return, you will establish formal boundaries for your territorial claims and agree to conduct future interspecies relations according to protocols we will jointly develop. Technological assistance from humanity? The implications were staggering. Access to human technology could advance Dominion science by centuries, possibly millennia. The alternative, Dr. Cross added with clinical detachment, is that humanity will be forced to impose those boundaries unilaterally. This process would be efficient but significantly less pleasant for all parties involved. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in absolute silence. Once again, Vex-Prime stared at the tactical displays, where thousands of human vessels continued their patient orbit around his fleet, each one apparently representing technology so advanced that his entire civilization would require centuries to understand even basic principles. But beyond the immediate tactical situation, he was now contemplating implications that stretched across the entire galactic region. Humanity was not simply defending their home system. They were establishing themselves as a regional power with the capability to enforce their decisions across dozens of star systems. Sir, Officer Krill ventured quietly, High Command is requesting immediate status updates. They are becoming insistent about our failure to proceed with standard occupation protocols. Vex-Prime considered his options with a careful deliberation that had kept him alive through 2 centuries of military command. He could attempt to explain the situation to his superiors, knowing they would likely dismiss his reports as impossible. He could order an attack, knowing it would result in complete annihilation. Or he could do something unprecedented in Dominion military history, that he could surrender. But as he contemplated the implications of each choice, one final transmission began crackling through the communications array. This time, the voice belonged to Director Webb, the same human who had initiated this entire conversation. Commander Vex-Prime, I trust that Dr. Cross has provided adequate clarification regarding our position. Before you finalize your decision, however, I wanted to share one additional piece of information that might influence your thinking. Webb's voice carried the same casual tone that had characterized their first conversation, but beneath that casualness was something that made Vex-Prime's survival instincts operate in full emergency mode. The technology we have demonstrated for your consideration represents what we classify as our defensive capabilities. These systems are designed to protect human territory and human interests, nothing more. Webb paused, and Vex-Prime could hear the familiar sound of liquid being poured into a container. Our offensive capabilities, Commander, are significantly more creative in their applications. We have never had occasion to demonstrate them, since no species has provided sufficient provocation to warrant their deployment. The pause that followed was longer this time, and when Webb continued, his voice carried implications that made the entire bridge crew instinctively move away from their tactical stations. I mention this not as a threat, Commander, but as context. Humanity has spent the last 2 centuries preparing for contact with spacefaring civilizations. We have developed contingency plans for every conceivable scenario, including several that we sincerely hope never become necessary to implement. Webb's voice took on what might have been sympathy, if sympathy could carry undertones of absolute finality. The choice before you is simple, Commander Vex-Prime. You can accept our offer of peaceful coexistence and technological cooperation, or you can discover why humanity has never lost a war. The transmission ended. Vex-Prime sat in his command throne, surrounded by displays showing the tactical impossibility of his situation, and made the decision that would reshape the balance of power across the entire galactic region. Communications Officer Zenth, he ordered, open a channel to the human fleet. Channel open, sir. Director Webb, this is Commander Vex-Prime. The Galactic Dominion accepts your offer of peaceful coexistence. We request permission to begin immediate evacuation of all Dominion vessels from this solar system. Webb's response came almost immediately, carrying notes of what might have been genuine relief. Permission granted, Commander. Welcome to the beginning of a very interesting partnership. As the Sovereign's wrath began powering its engines for departure, Vex-Prime reflected on the day when the Galactic Dominion had learned that expansion across the galaxy required something more than superior firepower. IT required the wisdom to recognize when you had encountered something truly superior to yourself. And humanity, apparently, was exactly that superior force the universe had been waiting to provide.